Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's episode we're going to be looking at continuing on our rendering techniques. We'll be looking at our ice, rock and fabrics. If you're going to do this at home, you're going to need a few things. Firstly, you're going to need a sheet of A4 paper. Secondly, you're going to need a HB pencil. What's desirable here would be a rubber and a ruler, and of course, because we're rendering, we're going to need some colouring pencils. Ideally, a blue, green, a grey, an orange and a brown. Okay, let's get started. So our first texture today is going to be our ice texture. Now the ice texture we want to draw in 3D to show it has some kind of inside. So if I just draw these like this, and then I draw parallel lines like that, and then I just draw this parallel and I draw that parallel, then I'm going to end up creating a wireframe so I can see through our object. So what that looks like here is this. Now we can see through it. That's the first part. I'm going to add in a couple of these lines here like this, maybe one down here, and these are just going to act as highlights. Areas where draw a little bit of rubber there, areas where we would get a shine on our glass or ice texture. So I said before we're going to need a green here, or a blue, doesn't really matter particularly which one you use at this stage. Now one of the things we're going to do when we're shading this is we're going to shade up to the line, but we're not going to actually shade on the line. That will create our highlight for us. So let's start shading these in like that, and again we can use the edge of the pencil crayon to get our shadow in there, our shade, like that. And again I can shade in here as well, and I can stop on that line like this. So I'm just going to shade up to all the lines but not actually touch the lines. Like that. And that's going to end up allowing us to create the illusion that we've got this highlight going all the way around the outside. Now the way I'm shading this with a much thicker pencil line is because I've got my pencil, and instead of drawing it like this, I've tilted it on its side. So I'm using the whole of the lead. That's why it's really important to have that sharp pencil. Otherwise, what will end up happening is you'll have to shade like this. Which you can still do, but it's just easier if you use the side of the pencil crayon to do it like that. So there we go. That's the first part done. One thing I might do here is actually go over this line nice and dark with my green crayon. Right, so, and then remember that technique I taught last time is to hold it at arm's length apart so we can have a look at it and go, yep, okay, it's starting to look like a texture that we want it to look like, but it's not quite there. So I'm going to select a darker green now, and I'm going to go back in and start to add in some shadows, some darker areas. Whenever we're rendering anything, we're looking to try and build up that depth. So let's get some shadow in here. This will be quite dark. Now I'm trying to shade, it's quite strange because I'm trying to shade on that back panel. I'm trying to draw this back panel here, but I'm also shading on top as well. So sometimes I think it's going to be quite useful to shade in different directions. That way we can get the impression that, oh, okay, so that's the top part. So I'll do that again because it'll make that more sense. I'll show you that over here. Now again, I'm still being very careful not to touch those edges like that. And then of course I need to do the bottom part here as well, add some depth to this like that. Now what's fantastic about glass is it refracts the light, so it sends the light in multiple different directions, so you get these lovely highlights all around our texture. got that in there like this. So there's textures going on quite nicely now. Like that. Beautiful. Zoom out a bit. Yep, okay, so it's starting to get there now. I'm going to go back to my original green. And now I'm going to add some highlights. Now I'm going to come in to these edges a little bit now. And shade in these edges. And we left these for highlights, and now's the time to start adding this highlight back in. I can shade over the top. Like that. To show this depth. And don't be afraid to keep going between the two. So again, going a bit darker here, shading these edges in. The more depth we create, the better the texture is going to look. And I can use my rubber as well to add in highlights like this, just to raise bits out like that. So I'm just coming in here and I'm literally just almost like shading with the rubber. Just shading over the top and working back in again. And over here I might just shade a bit like that. Just across here. Let's just with my rubber just shade across like that. And then go back. Is it looking like a glass texture? Have I lost part of it there? Let's go back in with that dark. Like this. Let's not lose that section there. That's quite important, that. Now, once you've got your little glass texture in a position where you're like, okay, yeah, it's see-through, I've got some textures on here, I'm quite happy with what it looks like now. Now's the time to start adding that bounce line. So a little bit like what we did with the shade. I'm going to come out like this, like that, and this time we're going to add a little curve here like that, and I'm going to try my best to try and shade that curve like this. So I'm shading in like an arc. It's quite hard to do to start with, so dark here and then gradually get lighter and lighter like that. And then we could do something similar here. We're just going to curve this. Now because light is refracted, it's going to curve. It's not going to be a flat object because light doesn't bend at angles like that on the floor. It's going to be refracted. So what we're going to end up seeing then is this light green here is going to appear in our shadow. So we can get the green like this, and it's going to end up, and I'm just shading it out like that with a few like lines, and we're going to have a little bit around here as well, this corner, and we might have a touch of shade, touch of shadow. We could use the pencil for this, just ever so lightly like that, ever so lightly put that shadow in there. There, that's better. Didn't have, pencil wasn't dark enough. You won't have that issue there. You'll have your HB, so you'll just be able to put your pencil line in straight away. And then, so look at it from back here. I'm quite happy with that. Could always add a bit of highlight back in over here as well. So there is our glass texture. Always like to work back into those textures there. So let's move over to our next texture here, which is going to be a rock texture. Now, when we're creating things like rocks and stones, we need to remember that they're made up of jagged edges. So I'm not going to be using any kind of straight lines here at all. It's all going to be a wibbly wobbly straight line. So where I would normally have a straight line like this, it's going to be like a wibbly wobbly line like that. I might have a few cracks in here that are wibbly wobbly up like this. and a couple over here like that, and maybe I'll have a few over here. Might even have a piece like this, a chunk missing out the side. I can just shade in like that. Now with the rock texture, again, use the edge of that pencil crayon. I'm just going to shade all over the top in grey, and then go back again. Remember, this is going to be our shadow layer, so it's going to be the darkest part, and I might just come into these edges to shade in those parts like that. Do the same thing over here, just give it one pass though with the shading, just shade all the way across into the corners. Don't forget those corners. Don't be afraid to go a little darker in the edges, and then just one direction straight across the top like that, quick as you can. There we go. Now we can start to add these shadows in here like this. These parts are going to be darker, of course, because they're bits that have been chipped away. Or a little bit down there as well like that. Now when you create these cracks, so if you create a crack like this, usually the crack will start from something, so let's zoom in a bit. Let's just add a little piece like that, a little chunk, to see, okay, that's where the crack started from. So the crack's going to start from something. So that's why I add these extra bits in here like this, because the crack's got to start from somewhere. And then in here we can come in, add a little bit like that. That's too straight, so let's shade that out like this. There we go, and for me there's not enough cracks on here, so I'm going to add a few more. Like that, there we go. And we can even add in some little bits of marks, just stones and things. They keep getting bashed and knocked about, so they're going to have little bits of chips and things on them, so I'm just adding in little textures, so I'm just adding in little shapes like this and little lines like that, and you'll start to end up building. Now don't dot it like this, that's not what I'm doing. I'm actually drawing in very small shapes all over that work like that. That way I'm going to end up creating that texture. I'm building up those layers. Not quite happy with that. Let's get a few scratches in here as well. And I'm just drawing little lines, little knocks, little chips all over the work like that. Let's zoom out and have a good look at that. Does it look like a rock texture yet? Nearly there. We can of course use the rubber and add in a bit of highlight here, just in these edges like that, and then maybe a little bit of highlight up here at the top. Maybe just rub a bit out there as well. Add a bit of shine. Now you might want to add an orange in here. That's okay as well. We can very lightly just sort of shade in parts of my rock with a bit of orange, just to give it a bit of colour. Really lightly on the top. Let's be careful here not to overdo it. And then of course I can shade in a bit more on my shadow texture, but I will have to go back over it again just to push it back a little bit, because we're in shadow. We need to have a darker orange here. Now pushing on hard is not going to be the trick for this texture. We need it to still stay quite dark. So I'll shade over it again and again, and don't be afraid to go over a few layers of darkness to really get that shadow there. But now we've got this beautiful texture appearing, makes it look like stone. So I'm going to turn it round, tilt it to get a good angle, and I'm going to start dark and I'm going to gradually shade it out, and then come in here like this, do the same on this side here, this little edge, and then get lighter and lighter and lighter. There we go, like that. Fantastic. Okay, so now we've got our glass and our rock texture. The last thing to do is our fabric. This is where I said a blue might come in handy here. Now when we're doing fabrics, we're just going to mainly stay on one track here. We're going to basically have it as one colour, like a denim or like a blue fabric, and we're just going to shade the whole thing first of all in a uniform blue, just to begin with, just to get that colour down. So shade like that. Tilt it round to get the best angle for your shading. Now, at the moment, I'm doing a very poor job of keeping this in between the lines. Now, some of you might remember that I teach you, if you've got a ruler, to keep your ruler up, bounced against it like that. So your ruler's here. And then when you shade up against it, you'll end up shading a really nice crisp line there. So there's a little technique for you if you're not colouring in between the lines. Let's shade this bit in like this. The most important thing when you're doing any kind of rendering is to just have fun. Let's create those textures. Let's try and make these look like real textures, real fabrics. Real woods, real metals, real plastics, real ice, glass, rocks, jelly. So just shade. I do a bit of cross hatching here and shade in a different direction. But I'm just shading it to block in that colour. That's the first thing with this kind of fabric we've got going off here. Okay, so I'll just rub this out just so we get a bit of a cleaner edge there, like that. Just rub that out there. Okay, and let's just put my line back in again. There we go. Right, now, where was I? So, this blue, we're going to need to show it's soft, so we're going to have to add some very subtle shadows to this. So let's just get my blue back in there. If you've got a darker blue, that's going to be better for you, but if you haven't, don't worry, we can just press on a little harder and we're just going to shade in like that, very gently. Nice little gradient here, and we'll come into the bottom part like that. Gradually shade up. There we go. And then in here, of course, we're going to have, let's say we've got a button on here, so let's add in a little button. Let's say it's on here like that. Now I'm going to sketch this on. And then of course we're going to have a very dark part here. This is going to be quite light, the actual button part. And then we might even want to add in little holes for it. Underneath will be dark here. And that will be a wibbly wobbly line. We'll have a bit of shadow on the top. Of course I'll have a little bit down here as well. Yeah, don't forget this bit's going to be the bit that's in shadow, so this is going to have the darkest part. So I'm pushing on quite hard now. Running out of battery life, but don't you worry, I'll have enough to finish this video. So just throwing in that colour. Whenever I'm shading in a direction though, I want to keep it in the same direction, unless I'm doing the edge. Like that. How are we looking there? Not bad, not bad. Okay, so let's just add a little bit in here, a little bit of shadow in there, just to show that we've got a bit of a soft material here. A little bit in there as well. go. Add that dark in there. Like that. There we go. Now, I'm going to go back to my pencil for a moment because I just want to have this defined a little bit more, and I lost it a little bit with the blue. So by going in here with my pencil, I can just add in those little details that maybe I've missed. Little bits of shadow underneath the button. I could even come in here and just add a little bit of shadow there, just to say, look, this is going underneath that. And again, we're working into our colours, we're working into that shading. And now I'm using the crayon, sorry, not the crayon, I'm using the HB to just go in and add a little bit more depth to our work here. Now the last thing, our final part here is to add in the actual thread, the cotton. So now with my pencil, I'm going to go around here in little curves like this, all the way around. Like that. Little curves all the way around. This is going to be the stitching that's holding everything together. I could even, sometimes it's nice to do a straight stitch, so we can just add little dashes that go all the way up like that, and they'll come down over here, won't they? So there'll be straight stitches all the way down here, like that as well. Of course, we're going to need to somehow stitch a little flap on the top there, like that as well. So we'll stitch that on, and then we'll come all the way down the back of here with those little curves, and we'll stitch on the back part as well. Okay, I think the last thing we need to do now with the rubber, if we need to, is just add a little bit of highlight to our work. Add a little bit in here, maybe a touch on that zipper there, not too much though, because remember, fabric's not really that reflective of colour. It's not going to shine anything back, so we're just going to sort of highlight parts of the work like that. And then from a distance, we should be able to tell that we've got 3 different textures there: our ice, our rock, and our fabric. So in today's session, we have looked at rendering 3 additional textures. We used the parallel lines for our ice and our glass texture. We had to make it look 3D first of all by showing us the inside parts. Then we used the green, a dark green and a light green to show the highlights and the lowlights. We added highlights parts to it with a double line across it. We then moved on to our rock texture, and we didn't use a single straight line on it. We added lots of cracks, lots of nooks and crannies, and we added some straight lines, and we actually created some little bits of chips that we added to it with a pencil. We added a little piece, a little flavour of colour to the rock texture to just give it a bit more of that texture. We then moved on to the fabric, where we just blocked the whole colour in, and then we chose to add a bit of shadow in different key parts to show it how it was soft. And then we added in the stitching. So we used a straight stitch and we used a blanket stitch as well. So, they're my rendering techniques. I'd love to see what you guys create at home. From me here, stay safe. Bye now.